Alright, we're going to go ahead and finish the reassembly process of this HTC Desire 816. We're going to go ahead and take our display cable and connect it to the display cable that we popped through and we put the screen back on. Just snaps right back on, just like a button on a pair of jeans. Just making sure the cables are going to reach the correct length. They connect to the top or the bottom of the logic board, at the very top up here. And we have some of our EMI shielding tape. Now this tape goes around the bottom portion of the display cable down here, around the back and then around to the front. It just kind of wraps around and connects to itself. This is a pretty important little cable. It can help you avoid any interference from other devices. That way your display doesn't act up. Now this fabric tape doesn't want to stick down very well when you put it back on, and that's okay. You just want to make sure it covers up the cable again. Now the easiest way to reassemble this is to kind of fold the cables over and put them back in onto the logic board. Make sure we snap our little connector down, and then the other one is a push-on connector. So make sure to line it up and then push it back in place. Just giving it gentle pressure, not being extremely forceful. We can line our logic board back up. It doesn't have to be pushed back in place yet, but we just want to get a good idea of how the cables need to get put back in there. Make sure they're connected before we start taping them down. Now that we have our cables put on there, we can go ahead and take our fabric shielding and put them on top of the cables. Remember how this disassembled? We're going to have to roll it back out on top and try to cover the cables from edge to edge here. You can see that mine didn't go very well there, so I'm going to pull it back up and try that again. There is some adhesive usually on the mid frame that's going to help hold it down. Just try to get as much of the cable covered as possible. If you ripped it, that's okay. Just make sure you put it back on. There, that's pretty good. It's okay if it's a little bit wavy. The battery will go over it. We can take our charge port and go ahead and put it back in place. Now this is going to be a little bit tricky. It has the little clips towards the top of the speaker up there that you may have to press it in place. There's also a little pin right where my index finger, my right hand is at, that has to be lined up properly to make it sit correctly. If not, it'll want to kind of pull itself up. So you may have to wiggle it around a little bit to get it to fit. You can see how it's kind of wobbly when I push on the top portion up here. The pin's not in place, although it's kind of lining up. It just hasn't fallen onto its connector yet, so you might have to move it around just a little bit to get it where you want it to fit into. It's not really sitting properly. I'll pull it out and try that one more time. See, the pin is just right underneath that where my index finger was just at. Go ahead and try to line it up again. There, that time it sat into place correctly for us. I'm going to go ahead and put our fabric tape over these connectors. Make sure you push down on the digitizer connector there as well onto the bottom charge port. And then we can put our fabric tape over the connectors there. And again, just try to make sure you cover up as much as the cable as possible. See that this did not line up. So we're going to pull it back up and try it one more time. There we go. Looks much better. Again, the tape doesn't have to be perfect. We can take our battery, just making sure that everything's level up here. We can go ahead and take our battery and put it back in as well. Should be enough adhesive to go ahead and hold it in place. Just push it back down and then push the battery connector right back on. It just pushes back into its correct spot. We'll do the same thing with our vibration module here. Make sure it's pushed down, and we need to put it back in. It's going to be pushed in from the back side into its connector. There's a little couple connectors and pins here that you need to get lined up, and you'll see that the logic board will sit flush as well. So make sure you have those all lined up before you start putting the screws in. You want to make sure that it sits nice and flush for a couple of reasons. One is you're going to put the screws and you don't want to damage anything. You also want your power and your volume buttons to work properly as well. So just double checking those buttons, make sure that they're working. And you can see that they're pressing. You kind of feel that little solid click that you get from the button when you press on it. I'm going to go ahead and put our 3 Phillips screws back in, the 2 that go in the charge port and the 1 that goes in the top, right here on the top of the motherboard. Find it easier to go ahead and put the screw on the end of the screwdriver. It's much easier to do this with a magnetized screwdriver and then put it back into its slot. Just double checking, make sure all those pins are lined up. Put the 2 in down here at the bottom by the charge port. Now we're going to put our black wire connector back in its correct spot. Normally the way that the wire fits in, you can tell where it's supposed to go. You can see the sharper turn goes down here at the bottom. I'd actually try to put the bottom connection on first, as there's a lot less room to maneuver it around than the top portion. It's really hard to kind of get this on here. You need to make sure it's lined up properly first. You'll kind of see it'll almost want to seat itself, and then you have to push it on just nice and lightly. Doesn't want to snap in for me. It looks like I'll have to use a tool to help me push this down. So I'm just going to use this nylon spudger here to help me push it back on once I get it lined up properly. Don't let these frustrate you. They can be a little bit tricky. Now it's on, we can go ahead and move it into place. Push it down into its slot. You want to make sure it's all the way in, so when you put the back cover on, the connectors don't kink it or crimp it. Go ahead and push on the top portion of it as well. And make sure it's all the way in its guide rails down here. Now we can go ahead and put our connectors on. Remember, this has the clip down towards the bottom, and then the 3 at the top up here to make sure it sits nice and flush. We can go ahead and put in our Torx 5 screws. 2 that fit on down here at the bottom, 1 on the right and then 1 on the left. Then before we go too much further, let's go ahead and power the phone on and make sure it's going to function properly for us. perfect. So we have the vibration, we have our picture. That's a good sign. Let's go ahead and put the rear black housing on here. So we're just going to push it back in all the way around, make sure it clips back in place. Just kind of work our way towards that. Clipped in closer towards the metal portion. That's where you push it down to get it to clip in. We have 4 Torx 5 screws. We're going to go on the back of this. Two more to go. Excellent. Let's double check it, make sure the touch is going to function for us. Let's kind of use our capacitive buttons, and then we'll try some on-screen buttons here as well. Perfect. There we go. Go ahead and put our cover in. You'll see a little flange that sits off of it. Just flips back in towards the bottom for the micro SD SIM card slot. And then we just need to put our back of our phone on. We should have our cover. Go ahead and start up here, pushing the top, the headphone jack in first. And it should just snap all the way in. You want to be a little bit careful that you don't want to have a snap push out and not want to connect in or damage any of them. Then your back will be kind of floppy and doesn't want to connect on. There you go. That is the reassembly. If you found the video helpful, go ahead and hit the like button. Comments, throw them down in the comments section at the bottom. And as always, I appreciate you watching. If you want to see future videos, go ahead and subscribe, and I'll try to upload when I can.